The air in the reaping hall tasted of rust and resignation. It was a fine, metallic dust that settled on the tongue, the ghost of ore mined from the hollowed-out mountains of his homeland, the same mountains that now bled resources for the Obsidian Empire. Elian stood in the silent rows of Omegas, his spine a rigid line of defiance he knew no one could see. It was an internal thing, a protest woven into his bone and marrow. He kept his eyes fixed on the grey marble floor, counting the veins of black that snaked through the polished stone. 112. He had counted them every year for the past 10 years since his presentation. Each vein was a river of sorrow, flowing from the heart of their conquered land to this cold, sterile center of imperial power. The silence was the worst part. It was not a peaceful silence. It was a weighted, manufactured thing, pressed down upon them by the sonic dampeners embedded in the high, vaulted ceilings. It amplified the sound of his own heart, a frantic, trapped bird beating against the cage of his ribs. It made the soft scuff of a boot, the rustle of a tunic, a universe of noise. He could feel the collective breath of the 100 other Omegas in the hall, a shallow, fearful tide rising and falling in unison. They were a harvest, a tithe of flesh paid to a distant, unfeeling god-emperor. The tribute, a word that tasted like ash in his mouth. It was meant to be an honor, a symbol of unity between the provinces and the imperial core, a single Omega chosen to be presented to the Alpha Prince, a living bridge between their worlds. But everyone knew the truth. The bridge always crumbled. The tributes were never seen again, their names fading into cautionary tales whispered by mothers to their children. They were broken, assimilated, or simply discarded, their spirits extinguished like candle flames in a vacuum. A low hum vibrated through the floor, signaling the arrival. The great obsidian doors at the far end of the hall slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a figure silhouetted against the harsh, white light of the corridor beyond. The Alpha Prince, Kalen of the House Voron. He moved with a predator's economy of motion, each step silent and deliberate. He was not a prince from a storybook. He was a weapon forged in the crucible of a military dynasty, clad in the severe black uniform of the Imperial Guard, its silver piping glinting like starlight on a frozen lake. His presence sucked the remaining warmth from the air. The scent that rolled off him was not the rich, earthy musk of a typical alpha, but something colder, sharper. Ozone after a lightning strike, the clean, sterile scent of cold stone and winter air. It was a scent of absolute control, of emotion chemically scrubbed away. Elian did not look up. He focused on the floor, on the 112 black veins, a mantra against the rising panic. He could feel the prince's gaze sweeping over the rows, a physical weight, a methodical assessment. He was not looking for beauty or grace or spirit. He was looking for a symbol, a specimen. The footsteps stopped. They stopped directly in front of his row. Elian's heart stuttered, a painful lurch in his chest. He squeezed his eyes shut for a fraction of a second, the image of his mother's face flashing behind his lids, her hands, calloused from weaving, tucking a stray piece of hair behind his ear that very morning. "Be small," she had whispered, her voice rough with unshed tears. "Be forgettable." He had tried. He had muted his scent, a trick he'd learned long ago, tucking it deep inside himself until it was little more than the faint, clean smell of linen and soap. He had practiced stillness, making his posture unremarkable, his expression a perfect mask of placid obedience. He had tried to become invisible, but the prince's shadow fell over him, a sudden eclipse. The cold intensified, a localized frost that prickled his skin. He felt, more than saw, the prince leaning closer. A long, silent moment stretched into an eternity. Elian could hear the blood roaring in his ears. He imagined the prince moving on, the shadow lifting, the cold receding. He prayed to the old gods of the mountain, the ones the empire had forbidden. His prayer, a silent, desperate scream. A black leather glove entered his field of vision. Fingers, long and elegant, yet radiating a strength that spoke of countless hours in the training cells, tilted his chin up. Elian's breath hitched. He had no choice but to meet the prince's eyes. They were the color of slate, of a storm-tossed sea, moments before the sky breaks. There was no warmth in them, no anger, no lust. There was only a chilling, analytical curiosity, the look of a scientist studying a new, intriguing microbe. The prince's thumb brushed against the soft skin of his jaw, a touch devoid of any tenderness. It was a touch of assessment, of ownership. "This one," Kalen said. His voice was a low baritone, as cold and precise as his scent. It was not a proclamation. It was a verdict. The words echoed in the profound silence of the hall. This one. 2 words that severed his past from his future. 2 words that condemned him. The guards moved in, their efficiency brutal. They flanked him, their presence a solid wall of muscle and armor. One of them placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, a gesture not of guidance, but of possession. Elian didn't struggle. He didn't cry out. The training of a lifetime, the desperate need to be small, held him rigid. He allowed them to lead him away from the rows of his peers, their collective gasp of relief, a physical wave that washed over his back. As he walked past the prince, Kalen's gaze followed him, unwavering. In that moment, Elian felt a spark of something other than fear. It was a cold, hard ember of fury, deep in his gut. He was not a tribute. He was not a specimen. He was Elian of the Grey Peaks, son of weavers and miners, and he would not be broken. He lifted his chin a fraction higher, a minuscule act of rebellion that only he would ever know. The prince's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something unreadable in their stormy depths. For the first time, the impassive mask seemed to crack, revealing a sliver of the man beneath. And in that sliver, Elian saw not a monster, but something far more terrifying. A perfect, beautiful, and utterly empty cage. He was being led to his death, but as the obsidian doors hissed shut behind him, sealing him away from everything he had ever known, he made a silent vow. He would not go quietly. He would take a piece of that perfect cage with him. The fury was a small, secret warmth against the encroaching, absolute cold. It was the only thing that was truly his, and he would hold on to it until the very end. The citadel was a monument to silence and order. It was carved not from the living rock of a mountain, but from a synthetic, light-absorbing polymer that gave the impression of perpetual twilight. Corridors stretched into infinity, their polished black floors reflecting the cold, recessed lighting strips in the ceiling, creating an endless, sterile lattice of light and shadow. There were no decorations, no art, no sign of life beyond the silent, gliding servitor droids that patrolled the halls and the occasional black-uniformed guard standing at perfect attention. The air was filtered, scrubbed of all scent, leaving only the faint, antiseptic tang of ozone. It was a place designed to erase individuality to sand down the rough edges of emotion until all that remained was smooth, compliant function. Elian was processed with the same dispassionate efficiency. His homespun clothes were taken and incinerated. He was scrubbed raw in a decontamination chamber by automated jets of stinging, odorless cleanser. His hair was shorn to a severe, practical length. He was dressed in a simple, sleeveless tunic and trousers of a soft, grey material that felt unnervingly like a second skin. He was given a designation, Tribute 734, which was encoded onto a small silver band locked around his wrist. The band was cold against his skin, a permanent reminder of his new reality. He was not a person. He was a number. He was an object. His quarters were opulent in their emptiness, a large, circular room with a single panoramic window that looked out not onto the sky or the city, but onto a meticulously curated digital projection of a nebula, its slow, majestic swirl of purple and blue gases, both beautiful and profoundly artificial. The floor was soft, yielding underfoot. The bed was a low, wide platform in the center of the room, its sheets a stark, clinical white. There was no desk, no chair, no books, nothing to touch or hold. It was a sensory deprivation chamber disguised as a luxury suite, a prison designed to make the inmate yearn for any stimulus, any connection, even a cruel one. It was here he met Lyra. She entered without a sound, a phantom in a high-timber matching grey uniform, her face a placid mask that could have been carved from marble. She was an Omega, her scent a barely there whisper of faded jasmine and something vaguely chemical, like a flower preserved in formaldehyde. Her eyes were the most disturbing part of her. They were a pale, vacant blue, like a sky bleached of all color by a relentless sun. She moved with a practiced, fluid grace, her hands clasped neatly in front of her. "I am your attendant," she said, her voice a soft, melodic monotone, devoid of any inflection. "I am here to assist you in your transition." Elian said nothing, watching her. He recognized the look in her eyes. It was the look of a wild bird that had beaten its wings against the bars of its cage for so long that it had forgotten the shape of the sky. She was a former tribute, a survivor, a success story by the Empire's standards. "You will find your new life is one of great privilege," Lyra continued, her gaze fixed somewhere over his shoulder. "Your every need will be met. Sustenance will be provided at designated intervals. The atmospheric controls are calibrated for optimal Omega physiology. You are safe here. Safe." The word was a mockery. He was a specimen in a sterile jar, and she was the label. "What is your name?" Elian asked, his voice raspy from disuse. The question seemed to startle her. A flicker of something, confusion, pain, crossed her features before the placid mask snapped back into place. "Designations are sufficient," she replied smoothly. "It promotes clarity and order." "I am Elian." He said his own name as an anchor, a stone thrown against the placid, artificial surface of this place. He needed to hear it, to remember the sound of it. Lyra's lips thinned, almost imperceptibly. "Your designation is Tribute 734. It is best to acclimate quickly. Resistance is counterproductive. It complicates the intended outcome." "And what is the intended outcome?" Elian pressed, taking a step closer. He wanted to see her, truly see her. He wanted to find the person buried beneath the layers of conditioning. Lyra's gaze finally met his, and for a fleeting second he saw a chasm of old, settled grief in their depths. It was a terrifying, bottomless thing. "Integration," she whispered, the word a ghost on her lips. "Absolute harmony with the imperial will. You will become a symbol of unity, a testament to the benevolence of the throne." Her words were a script, learned and recited until they had replaced her own thoughts. But the tremor in her voice, the haunted look in her eyes, told a different story. The story was in the way she held her hands, one thumb rubbing compulsively against the other. It was in the faint, silvery scars that traced the delicate skin of her inner wrists, mostly hidden by the long sleeves of her uniform. The intended outcome was not harmony, it was erasure. The days that followed blurred into a seamless stretch of grey, monotony. Time was measured only by the changing light of the synthetic nebula outside his window and the silent arrival of nutrient paste on a floating tray. He was left entirely alone, adrift in the profound silence. He began to pace the circular room, his bare feet making no sound on the soft floor. He traced the circumference again and again, a caged animal learning the dimensions of its enclosure. He would sit for hours, staring at the swirling digital cosmos, trying to find patterns in the chaos, trying to feel something, anything. The silence began to eat at him. It was an active, hungry thing. It made him doubt his own memories. The scent of pine from the forests of his home, the taste of his mother's bread, the sound of his father's laughter, they all began to feel thin, like faded photographs. The citadel was designed to unmake him, to strip him down to his most basic components and rebuild him into something compliant. He thought of Lyra. He thought of the deadness in her eyes and the secrets etched into her skin. He was on the same path, and the thought terrified him more than any physical threat. He had to hold on. He began to fight back in the only ways he could. He hummed, a low, tuneless sound at first, but it grew stronger, filling the silence with the vibration of his own voice. He hummed the old mountain songs, the forbidden melodies of his people. It was a small rebellion, a pinprick of defiance in the suffocating emptiness, and he practiced his control. He focused on his own scent, the one he had learned to suppress. He let it unspool within him, a thread of winter hyacinth and cold ash, the scent of his mountain home after the first snow. He held it, cultivated it, kept it hidden deep inside, a secret garden in the heart of the machine. It was his last, inviolable piece of himself. He was not Tribute 734. He was not an asset to be integrated. He was alien, and he would remember his name, even if he was the only one left to speak it. He would not let them turn him into a ghost. He would not become Lyra. Not yet. He would wait. He would endure. And he would remember the sky. He was there for 10 cycles, 10 slow, agonizing rotations of the artificial nebula, before the prince came. The door to his room slid open with the same soft hiss as the nutrient tray's arrival, but the presence that filled the space was entirely different. It was Kalen, the Alpha Prince, and the sudden sharp scent of ozone and coldstone was a physical shock after days of sterile, filtered air. It was like a winter storm bursting into a sealed room, electric and overwhelming. Elian was sitting on the edge of the bed platform, his back to the door, but he felt the shift in the atmosphere instantly. The fine hairs on his arms stood on end. His heart, which had settled into a slow, monotonous rhythm, began to pound, a frantic, irregular beat. He did not turn. He remained perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on a distant, swirling cluster of digital stars. It was a conscious choice, a refusal to be the startled prey. Kalen entered the room and the door slid shut behind him, encasing them in a sudden, charged intimacy. His footsteps were silent on the soft flooring, but Elian could feel his approach, a subtle displacement of air, a deepening of the shadows at the edge of his vision. The prince stopped a few feet behind him. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken tension. Elian focused on his breathing, keeping it slow and even, a fragile dam against the flood of instinct that screamed at him to submit, to turn, to expose his throat. He could feel Kalen's gaze on the back of his neck, an analytical, probing weight. He was being studied, his reaction, or lack thereof, catalogued and assessed. "You are quiet," Kalen said finally. His voice, unfiltered by the hall's acoustics, was deeper than Elian remembered, a low rumble that vibrated in the air. Elian remained silent. He offered nothing. He was a stone wall, a placid lake. Let the prince wonder what lay in the depths. Another long pause. Then, the whisper of movement. Kalen circled around him, moving with a liquid grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. He came to a stop in front of Elian, blocking the view of the nebula. He was an eclipse of black and silver, his form stark against the cosmic backdrop. His face was as impassive as Elian remembered, a sculpture of aristocratic angles and cold control. But up close, Elian could see the faint lines of fatigue around his slate-grey eyes, the rigid set of his jaw. The prince was a cage too, just a larger, more ornate one. "Most tributes have broken by now," Kalen observed, his tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. "They scream, they weep, they plead. It is the expected, therapeutic response to radical environmental change." Elian finally lifted his gaze to meet the prince's. He let none of his fear, none of his anger show. His expression was a carefully constructed blank slate. "I am not most tributes," he said, his voice quiet but steady. A flicker of something, interest, annoyance, passed through Kalen's eyes. He tilted his head slightly, a gesture of avian curiosity. "No, you are not." He took a step closer, invading Elian's personal space. The scent of ozone intensified, making Elian's senses swim. It was a scent designed to dominate, to overwhelm. "Your scent is muted, suppressed. That requires a great deal of control for an Omega. Where did you learn such a thing?" The question was a scalpel, seeking a vulnerability. Elian's mind flashed back, an involuntary, painful spasm of memory. He was 10 years old, small for his age, hiding in the hollow of a fallen log at the edge of his village. It was the day of the first imperial raid, before the subjugation was complete. Soldiers in black armor were dragging people from their homes. He could smell the acrid tang of fear scent from the other villagers, a cloying, sweet perfume of panic that drew the alphas like sharks to blood. An older Omega, a boy named Reese, had broken from the line and tried to run. His terror scent had bloomed, a cloud of pure distress, and the alpha soldiers had descended on him, their own scents flaring into a predatory rage. They hadn't killed him. They had done something worse. They had broken him in the street, a public and brutal display of dominance. Elian had watched through a crack in the log, his own small body trembling, his own scent threatening to betray him. He had clamped down on it, a desperate, instinctive act of will. He had pictured a box in his mind, a cold, iron box, and he had pushed his scent, his very essence, into it, slamming the lid shut. He had held his breath until his lungs burned, focusing all his energy on that internal lock. And the patrol had passed by his hiding place, oblivious. He had learned control from necessity. He had learned it from terror. He would not give that memory to the prince. "Control is necessary for survival in the provinces," Ilian said, his voice clipped and cool. "We are not afforded the luxury of therapeutic responses." Kalen's gaze sharpened. He was searching for the lie, the evasion. He leaned down, his face now level with Elian's, so close that Elian could feel the faint warmth of his breath. The proximity was a violation, a calculated move to shatter his composure. The alpha's scent was a physical pressure, demanding a reaction, demanding submission. "Look at me, Tribute 734, Kalen murmured, his voice a silken threat. "I am your prince, your alpha, your entire world, now. That control you prize so highly, I will be the one to break it." Elian met his stare, without flinching. Inside, his instincts were screaming, a symphony of terror and rage. But on the surface, he was ice. He let a small, cold smile touch his lips. "Many have tried," he whispered, the words a sliver of defiance. The prince's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. For the first time since the reaping, Elian saw a genuine emotion on Kalen's face. Surprise. It was followed by a slow, dangerous glimmer of something else. Not anger, not lust. It was the thrill of an unexpected challenge. He had expected a broken toy, a compliant symbol. He had found something else entirely, something that did not fear him in the right way. Kalen straightened up, the moment of intensity passing as quickly as it had come. The mask of cold indifference settled back over his features. "Your integration period will be interesting," he said, the words clipped and formal once more. He turned and walked to the door without another glance. As it hissed open, he paused. "Do not mistake my curiosity for kindness," he said, his back still to Elian. "The outcome remains the same. The system is absolute. You will break, or you will be broken." The door slid shut, and he was gone. The scent of ozone lingered, a ghostly promise in the sterile air. Elian's control finally shattered. A violent tremor ran through his body, and he wrapped his arms around himself, his knuckles white. He had won the first battle, a skirmish of wills in a gilded cage. But the prince's final words echoed in the silence. The system is absolute. He had shown his strength, but in doing so, he had made himself a target. He had become interesting. And in the Obsidian Citadel, to be interesting was the most dangerous thing of all. The days that followed the prince's visit acquired a new, sharper edge. The monotony remained, but it was now underscored by a sense of being watched. Elian felt it as a constant, low-grade hum at the base of his skull, a prickling sensation on his skin. He knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that he was under observation. Hidden lenses in the walls, microscopic sensors woven into the fabric of his clothes. The citadel had eyes and ears everywhere. He did not let it change his routine. He continued his silent pacing, his forbidden humming, his secret cultivation of his own scent. He turned his confinement into a performance. Let them watch him be still. Let them record his silence. He would give them nothing but the surface, a placid ocean concealing the turbulent currents below. He began to test the system in small, almost imperceptible ways. The nutrient paste arrived on its tray at precise intervals. One cycle, he refused to eat it. He pushed the tray to the far side of the room and sat with his back to it. Hours passed. He felt the gnawing emptiness in his stomach, the light-headedness of hunger. He was waiting for a reaction. A guard, perhaps, or Lyra, sent to coax him. Nothing. The system was automated, impersonal. It did not care if he ate. It only cared that sustenance was provided. The tray remained until the next designated interval, when it floated away, untouched, and was immediately replaced by a fresh one. It was a chilling lesson. The system did not require his participation, only his presence. He was a component, and his personal will was irrelevant. He ate the next meal. Starvation was a weapon he could not afford to use against himself. Lyra began to visit more frequently. She would appear with a new set of grey tunics or to adjust the room's ambient temperature by a fraction of a degree. Her movements were always precise, her expression serene, her words scripted. She spoke of the honor of his position, of the stability the empire provided. She was a walking, talking piece of propaganda. Yet Elian saw the cracks. He saw the way her fingers trembled when she thought he wasn't looking. He saw the frantic, compulsive way she smoothed down the fabric of her uniform over and over again. One day, as she was replacing the water carafe by his bed, he spoke to her, keeping his voice low and calm. "Did you have a name before?" Lyra froze, her hand hovering over the carafe. Her placid mask, tightened. "My designation is sufficient," she recited, the words rote and lifeless. "It was Lyra, wasn't it?" Elian said softly. He had heard the name whispered in the reaping hall years ago, the story of a tribute from the coastal provinces, one who had been chosen and had simply vanished into the citadel's machinery. The girl with eyes the color of the sea. Lyra's hand jerked, and the carafe slipped, shattering on the soft floor. The sound was shockingly loud in the silent room. Water pooled, catching the light of the nebula. For a moment, her composure broke completely. Her vacant blue eyes filled with a storm of raw, undiluted pain. It was the agony of a name remembered, a self she had been forced to murder. "Do not," she hissed, her voice a ragged, desperate thing he had never heard before. "Do not say that name." A servitor droid glided silently into the room, its mechanical arms extending to clean up the mess with unnerving efficiency. Lyra watched it, her breathing shallow and fast. She visibly forced the mask back on, piece by piece, locking her emotions away. When she looked at him again, her eyes were once more a calm, bleached blue. "The prince will be displeased with displays of sentiment," she said, her voice a perfect monotone again. "It is inefficient." She turned and left without another word. Elian knew he had pushed too far, but he had confirmed his suspicion. Lyra was not a machine. She was a ruin, and her pain was a warning. Meanwhile, he knew Kaelin was watching, not just through the Citadel's sensors, but directly. He would sometimes feel the prince's presence outside his door, a subtle shift in the corridor's atmosphere, the faint, sharp scent of ozone momentarily overriding the scrubbed air. Kaelin never entered. He just stood there, for minutes at a time, an unseen observer. What was he looking for? What did he hope to find? Elian's resistance was a puzzle the prince was trying to solve. In a system built on the predictable responses of fear and submission, Elian was an anomaly, a variable that defied the equation. This fragile stalemate was broken by a summons. One evening, Lyra appeared and instructed him to prepare. He was to be taken to the Chancellor. The name sent a chill down Elian's spine. The Chancellor was the architect of the modern empire, the shadowy figure behind the throne. He was a beta, a man who operated outside the primal dynamics of Alpha and Omega, and that made him, in many ways, more dangerous. He was pure ideology, pure logic. The Chancellor's office was in the highest spire of the Citadel. It was a vast, cold space, its walls lined with glowing data slates that scrolled with endless streams of information. At the center of the room, behind a desk of polished obsidian, sat a slender, unassuming man with silver hair and intelligent, calculating eyes. The Chancellor. Kalen was there too, standing at attention to the right of the desk, his face a mask of stone. He did not look at Elian as he was led into the room. "Tribute 734, the Chancellor said, his voice calm and precise. He gestured to a single, hard-backed chair placed in the middle of the floor. "Please." It was a command, not an invitation. Elian sat. The chair was uncomfortable, designed to keep him alert and off balance. "The prince tells me you are resilient," the Chancellor began, steepling his fingers. "An interesting quality. But resilience can be misconstrued as defiance. And defiance, like a virus, must be eradicated before it can spread." He looked at Kalen. "The tribute system serves a vital purpose, Your Highness. It is a psychological tool. We take the best, the strongest-willed Omega from a province, and we demonstrate their successful integration. We show their people that their spirit can be reshaped to serve the imperial will. When they see their chosen one thriving, content, and obedient, it pacifies them. It gives them hope for a peaceful, orderly future within the empire." His gaze shifted back to Elian, his eyes cold and sharp. "An unbroken tribute sends the wrong message. It suggests that our methods are fallible. It suggests that the old ways, the provincial ways, have value. It fosters dissent." Kalen remained silent, his expression unreadable. Elian felt a surge of cold dread. This wasn't a conversation. It was a diagnosis, and the Chancellor was explaining the necessity of the cure. "Your prince has been lenient," the Chancellor continued, a hint of disapproval in his tone. "He finds your novelty intriguing, but intrigue is an emotion, and emotion is the enemy of order. The time for observation is over. It is time for the next phase of your integration." He picked up a small silver device from his desk. It looked like a medical injector. "This will help you," he said, his voice softening into a grotesque parody of kindness. "It is a neuroinhibitor. It will quiet the unproductive parts of your mind, the parts that cling to the past. It will help you find peace. It will help you become the symbol your people need you to be." He held it out to Kalen. "Administer it, Your Highness. It is your duty. It is your right. Show him the benevolence of the throne." The room fell silent. Kalen did not move. He stared at the injector in the Chancellor's hand. Then his gaze slowly lifted to meet Elian's. For the first time, Elian saw not a prince or a weapon, but a man trapped in a cage of his own making. He saw a flicker of doubt, of conflict in the depths of those stormy eyes. The system was absolute, he had said. But now, the system was asking him to personally, chemically, lobotomize the very spirit he had found so compelling. Elian held his breath. He did not plead. He did not look away. He simply met Kalen's gaze, a silent challenge, a silent appeal. In that moment, the fate of his mind, his very self, rested not with the cold logic of the Chancellor, but with the conflicted heart of the Alpha Prince. The silence in the Chancellor's office became a living entity, a suffocating pressure that seemed to bend the very air. Kalen's gaze was locked with Elian's, an entire, unspoken war being waged in the space between them. Elian could see the struggle etched onto the prince's face, the slight tremor in his clenched jaw, the tightening of the muscles around his eyes. He was a man caught between the gears of the machine he was born to inherit and a nascent, unwelcome flicker of something else, conscience, humanity. Elian didn't dare to name it. The Chancellor's hand, holding the silver injector, remained extended, a patient, damning offer. His calm, calculating expression never wavered. He was the system personified, watching to see if its prime component would perform as designed. "Your Highness," the Chancellor prompted, his voice a silken whip of command. The honorific was a reminder of duty, of hierarchy, of the unbreakable chain of command that bound Kalen to his will. Slowly, deliberately, Kalen reached out and took the injector. Its metallic surface gleamed under the cold lights. His fingers closed around it, his knuckles white. He turned, his movements stiff and mechanical, and took a step toward Elian. Elian's heart plummeted. This was it. The end of the fight. The end of him. He closed his eyes, bracing for the sting of the needle, for the chemical fog that would descend upon his mind and scour it clean, leaving behind a placid, empty vessel. He thought of the mountains, of the scent of pine and snow, one last time. He would hold on to that image until the very end, but the sting never came. Instead, he felt a sudden, sharp intake of breath from the Chancellor. Elian's eyes snapped open. Kalen had stopped. He was standing over Elian's chair, the injector in his hand, but he was not looking at Elian. He was staring at the device in his palm as if it were a venomous snake. With a sudden, violent motion, he closed his fist. There was a sickening crunch of metal and plastic. The injector shattered in his grip. A clear, viscous liquid dripped from between his fingers, sizzling faintly as it hit the polished floor. "No," Kalen said, his voice a low, guttural sound of pure defiance. He turned to face the Chancellor, his slate-grey eyes blazing with a cold fire Elian had never seen before. "The integration will proceed as I see fit. He is my tribute, my responsibility." The Chancellor's calm facade finally cracked. A flash of genuine anger, cold and sharp, crossed his features before he smoothed it away. "Your responsibility is to the Empire, Your Highness, not to a provincial specimen. Your sentiment is a liability." "My sentiment," Kalen bit out, taking a step toward the desk, his posture radiating a primal authority that overshadowed the Chancellor's calculated power, "is a tool you have forgotten how to wield. Fear and control are effective, but they are brittle. A symbol must have a spirit, or it is merely a hollow idol, easily shattered. This tribute's spirit is formidable. To destroy it would be a waste." He opened his hand, letting the crushed remains of the injector fall to the floor with a clatter. "I will shape him, but I will do it my way." The Chancellor stared at Kalen for a long moment. His intelligent eyes narrowed. He was recalibrating, reassessing this unexpected move from his perfectly conditioned prince. A slow, thin smile touched his lips. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the expression of a master strategist who sees a new, more interesting path to the same destination. "Very well, Your Highness," he said smoothly. "A fascinating hypothesis. Let us test it. The vernal equinox gala is in 3 days. A public event. The tribute will accompany you. He will be presented to the imperial court. Let us see how this formidable spirit of his performs under the scrutiny of the entire empire. Let us see if your method yields a compliant asset or a public embarrassment." It was a trap, a perfectly laid snare. The gala was the pinnacle of the imperial social calendar, a place of immense pressure and rigid etiquette. To throw Elian into that viper's nest was to guarantee his failure. Any misstep, any flicker of defiance would be magnified 1,000 times. It would prove the Chancellor right and force Kalen's hand. Kalen's jaw tightened, but he could not refuse. He had claimed authority. Now he had to demonstrate it. "He will be ready," Kalen said, his voice tight with a cold fury directed as much at himself as at the Chancellor. He turned to Elian, his expression unreadable once more. "Come." Elian rose from the chair, his legs unsteady. He had been spared, but he had been thrown from a cage into an arena. He followed Kalen out of the office, acutely aware of the Chancellor's cold, analytical gaze on his back. The walk back to his quarters was silent. Kalen's stride was long and fast, fueled by a contained rage. When they reached the door, he finally stopped and faced Elian. The air between them crackled with tension. "You are a complication I did not anticipate," Kalen said, his voice low and strained. "The Chancellor sees you as a weakness in me, a flaw in my conditioning. He will use you to undermine me." "I did not ask for this," Elian replied, his voice quiet but firm. "I did not ask to be your test or his weapon." Kalen's expression softened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something that might have been regret. "No, you did not." He looked at Elian, truly looked at him, and for the first time there was no calculation in his gaze, only a raw, startling vulnerability. "At the gala, you cannot be yourself. You cannot be defiant. You cannot be Elian. You must be a perfect, placid doll. You must smile when I tell you to smile. You must speak only the words I give you. Your life, and perhaps my future, depends on your performance. Can you do that?" It was a bitter irony. To survive, he had to become the very thing he had fought so hard against. A hollow symbol, an empty shell. But looking at the prince, at the man who had crushed the injector in his hand, Elian understood. This was no longer just his fight. It was theirs. A fragile, unspoken alliance had been forged in that cold office, a shared rebellion against the Chancellor's absolute control. "I understand," Elian said. Kalen nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He reached out, his gloved hand hovering in the air for a moment before he gently brushed a stray lock of hair from Elian's forehead. The touch was brief, hesitant, but it sent a jolt of warmth through Elian's entire body. It was the first gesture of kindness, of connection he had felt since he had been taken. "Good," Kalen murmured, his voice softer than Elian had ever heard it. He then straightened, the prince's mask falling back into place. "Lyra will bring you what you need. Be ready." He turned and left, his footsteps receding down the silent corridor. Elian stepped back into his room, the door hissing shut. He was alone again, but everything had changed. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the echo of a crushed injector, the weight of a shared secret, and the ghost of a gentle, fleeting touch. He had a role to play, and for the first time he felt a sliver of something he had thought long dead. Hope. A dangerous, fragile hope that perhaps, just perhaps, they could find a way to break the system from within. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of meticulous preparation. Lyra became a constant presence, her usual monotonal efficiency now tinged with a nervous, frantic energy. She arrived with an army of servitor droids carrying bolts of shimmering fabric, jewel cases, and cosmetic applicators. Elian was measured, poked, and prodded. He was taught the 1,000 intricate rules of court etiquette, the precise angle of a bow, the correct form of address for a duke versus a minister, the subtle art of holding a wine flute without looking provincial. He was a statue being chiseled into a shape that would be acceptable to the imperial court. He endured it all with a placid, detached obedience, playing the part Kaelan had assigned him. He learned his lines, the pre-approved, vapid responses to any questions he might be asked. I am overwhelmed by the prince's generosity. The citadel is a testament to imperial ingenuity. I am honored to serve as a bridge between our worlds. Each word was a betrayal of himself, a small, sharp cut to his soul, but he repeated them until they were smooth and effortless. The most difficult part was the scent. Lyra brought him a small, ornate bottle filled with a golden, viscous oil. Scent harmonizer, she explained, her voice carefully neutral. It will mask your natural scent and replace it with something more pleasing to the court, something less distinct. She dabbed a small amount on his wrist. A cloying, artificial fragrance bloomed in the air, a generic, sweet floral scent, the kind found in public spaces to mask unpleasant odors. It was the scent of erasure. It smelled like giving up. Elian recoiled, a visceral, involuntary reaction. No, he said, his voice flat. Lyra looked at him, and for a moment he saw that flicker of the girl she used to be, a flash of empathy, of understanding. It is required, she whispered, her eyes pleading with him. They will see your real scent as a challenge, as feral, uncivilized. Elian knew she was right, but his scent was the last piece of his home, the last piece of himself that he had. The smell of winter, hyacinth, and ash. It was his truth. To cover it felt like the ultimate surrender. He looked at the golden oil, then back at Lyra. An idea, desperate and dangerous, began to form in his mind. A way to obey the letter of the law, but not the spirit. I will apply it myself, he said. Lyra hesitated, then nodded, relief washing over her face. She left the bottle and retreated, her duty done. On the night of the gala, Elian was dressed in silks the color of a twilight sky, embroidered with fine silver thread that mimicked the patterns of the nebula outside his window. He looked at his reflection in the polished black wall of his room. The person staring back was a stranger, a beautiful, elegant, and utterly empty creature. A doll. He picked up the bottle of scent harmonizer. He uncapped it, the sweet, cloying fragrance filling his senses. Then, with painstaking care, he applied it, but not to his pulse points, not to his neck. He dabbed the smallest possible amount behind his knees and on the soles of his feet, places where it would be hidden, its fragrance muted by the layers of his clothing. He then took a deep breath and did something he hadn't done since he'd arrived. He let his own scent, his true scent, rise from the iron box where he kept it locked away. Not a flood, but a subtle, controlled release. A whisper of winter hyacinth and cold ash, a scent of wildness and sorrow, of mountains and snow. It clung to the fine silk of his tunic, a secret truth hidden beneath the artificial perfume. It was a risk, a terrible, foolish risk. But it was his. Kaelan arrived to escort him. He was dressed in his formal Alpha Prince regalia, a uniform of midnight black velvet with a high, silver-lined collar that framed his face, making him look even more remote and regal. His scent of ozone and stone was sharp, clean, and commanding. He stopped dead when he entered the room, his eyes widening as he took in Elian's appearance. For a moment, the mask of the prince slipped, and Elian saw a raw, unguarded appreciation in his gaze. It was gone as quickly as it came. "You are acceptable," Kalen said, his voice stiffly formal. He offered his arm. Elian took it, his fingers barely brushing the rich velvet. The prince's arm was tense beneath the fabric, a rod of solid muscle. As they walked, Elian could feel Kalen's subtle reaction to his scent, a slight tensing of his jaw, a fractional widening of his nostrils. He was catching the whisper of hyacinth beneath the cloying floral perfume. He knew what Elian had done, but he said nothing. The grand hall of the citadel was a dizzying spectacle of opulence and power. Crystalline chandeliers cast fractured rainbows across a sea of brightly colored silks and gleaming jewels. The air was thick with the cacophony of 100 different perfumes, the murmur of polite conversation, and the strains of a string orchestra playing a sterile, mathematically precise piece of music. It was a sensory assault. Alphas and betas in their finest attire moved through the room with practiced grace, their smiles sharp, their eyes constantly assessing. Elian felt 1,000 gazes land on him as he entered on Kalen's arm. He was the novelty of the evening, the provincial curiosity. He could feel their judgment, their disdain, their predatory interest. He kept his expression placid, his smile gentle and meaningless, just as he had practiced. He was the perfect doll. The Chancellor was holding court near the center of the room, a quiet spider in the middle of a glittering web. He watched them approach, his eyes cold and knowing. He had set the stage. Now he was waiting for the play to begin. For an hour, Kalen guided him through the treacherous social currents, introducing him to ministers and generals. Elian played his part perfectly, reciting his bland, pre-approved lines. He was a resounding success, a testament to the prince's skill at taming a wild thing. The Chancellor was watching, his thin smile unwavering. He was not fooled. He was waiting. The moment came unexpectedly. A high-ranking duchess, a woman with a cruel smile and eyes like chips of ice, cornered them near a balcony. "Your Highness," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "your new pet is quite lovely, but does he do anything more than look pretty and repeat pleasantries? Does he have any spirit at all?" Kalen's grip on Elian's arm tightened. "The tribute spirit is one of cooperation and grace, Duchess," he said, his voice dangerously smooth. But the Duchess was not deterred. She leaned closer to Elian, sniffing the air theatrically. "Such a tame scent, all flowers and sugar. I confess, I was hoping for something a little more authentic from the Grey Peaks." It was a direct challenge, a test. And then chaos erupted. A high-pitched screech of failing machinery echoed from the ceiling. One of the massive crystalline chandeliers directly above them shuddered violently, its moorings snapping. It began to fall. People screamed. The crowd surged back, a wave of panic and silk. There was no time to think. Elian saw the huge, glittering mass plummeting toward them. Saw the Duchess's face, a mask of terror. He saw Kalen, his eyes wide with shock. Instinct, pure and primal, took over. But it wasn't the instinct to flee. In that split second, as the world dissolved into motion and noise, Elian's only thought was of the man beside him, the prince, the ally. He shoved Kalen hard, pushing him away from the direct path of the falling chandelier. It was an act of pure, unthinking sacrifice. Kalen stumbled back, his eyes locking with Elian's in a moment of stunned disbelief. The chandelier crashed to the floor an instant later, an explosion of crystal and metal. It missed them both, but a large, jagged shard of crystal, flung sideways by the impact, flew through the air. It sliced across Elian's arm, a line of searing, white-hot pain. The shock and the pain shattered Elian's carefully constructed control. The iron box in his mind burst open. His scent, his true scent, flared out. No longer a whisper, but a desperate clarion call. The rich, wild fragrance of winter hyacinth and cold ash flooded the air, cutting through the cloying perfumes of the gala. It was a scent of fear, of pain, but also of fierce, defiant life. And in the heart of the chaos, Kalen's scent answered. The cold, controlled wall of ozone and stone shattered. A wave of raw, possessive, and utterly furious alpha scent erupted from him. The smell of a gathering thunderstorm, of lightning striking ancient rock, a protective rage. He moved, a black-clad blur, closing the distance between them. He ignored the screaming courtiers, the approaching guards. He went to Elian. He reached out, not for the wound, but for Elian's face, his ungloved fingers warm against his cheek. He shielded Elian with his own body, turning to face the chaos, his expression one of lethal fury. In the middle of the glittering wreckage and the panicked crowd, their scents mingled, a wild, impossible duet of mountain snow and violent storms. And everyone saw it. Everyone smelled it. The prince, who was supposed to be the master of an obedient pet, was instead shielding his tribute with a ferocity that was anything but political. It was personal. It was primal. The chancellor stood frozen on the far side of the room, his thin smile finally gone. His perfect play had just been torn to shreds. He had intended to expose Elian as a failure. Instead, he had exposed the prince's heart. The aftermath of the chandelier's fall was a study in controlled chaos. Imperial guards, clad in their obsidian armor, formed a cordon around the wreckage, their movements sharp and efficient. Medical droids glided through the panicked courtiers, their metallic voices murmuring calming platitudes. But at the epicenter of it all, Kalen and Elian remained in their own bubble of charged silence. Kalen's body was a solid, unyielding shield in front of Elian, his hand still cupping Elian's cheek, his thumb gently stroking the skin just below his eye. The prince's scent was a territorial storm, a clear, unambiguous warning to anyone who might approach. It was a scent that said, "Mine." The pain in Elian's arm was a dull, throbbing ache, but it was distant, secondary to the overwhelming proximity of the alpha. He could feel the heat radiating from Kalen's body, the low, rumbling vibration in his chest. He was drowning in the prince's scent, and instead of feeling threatened, he felt anchored, safe. A guard captain, his face grim, finally broke the perimeter. "Your Highness, are you harmed?" Kalen's head snapped up, his eyes like chips of flint. "Secure the area. Find out what happened. No one leaves this hall until I have a full report." His voice was pure command, the voice of a future emperor, and the captain snapped a salute before turning to bark orders. Only then did Kalen's attention return to Elian. His gaze dropped to the gash on Elian's arm, where dark blood was welling up, staining the pale silk of his sleeve. The prince's expression tightened, a mixture of fury and a strange, raw concern. "You're injured," he stated, his voice tight. "You pushed me." "It was falling," Elian said, his own voice sounding thin and reedy to his ears. The shock was beginning to set in, a cold tremor running through him. "You are the prince." "And you are a fool," Kalen bit out, but there was no heat in the words. He carefully took Elian's injured arm, his touch surprisingly gentle. He tore a strip of fabric from the hem of his own velvet tunic, a shocking act in this court of perfect appearances, and began to wrap the wound with practiced efficiency. "Did you not think of your own safety?" "Did you?" Elian countered softly, looking up at him. The question hung in the air between them. Kaelin's instinctive, protective reaction had been just as reckless, just as revealing as Elian's own. The prince's hands stilled for a moment. He met Elian's gaze, and in the depths of his eyes, Elian saw the truth. He hadn't thought. He had only reacted. The carefully constructed walls of his conditioning had crumbled in the face of a genuine threat to someone he cared about. The word was too simple, too small for the ferocious, possessive emotion that had poured from him, but it was the closest Elian could come. The Chancellor approached them then, his composure restored, his face a mask of grave concern. 2 guards flanked him. "A shocking failure of maintenance, Your Highness," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "We must get you both to the medbay immediately. The tribute, in particular, requires attention." The word tribute was a deliberate choice, a reminder of Elian's status, a subtle attempt to re-establish the old dynamics. But Kaelin didn't release Elian's arm. "He will be attended to in my quarters," Kaelin declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I want him under my personal watch until the cause of this accident is all determined." The Chancellor's eyes narrowed, almost imperceptibly. This was a breach of protocol. Tributes were assets, not guests in the royal wing. To bring Elian, there was a public declaration, a political statement of immense significance. "As you wish, Your Highness," the Chancellor said, his voice betraying nothing, but his eyes, as they rested on Elian, were filled with a cold, renewed calculation. Elian was no longer just a complication. He was now a rival power center, a focal point for the prince's unexpected and dangerous sentiment. He had become a threat that would need to be dealt with far more directly. Kaelin led Elian from the hall, ignoring the whispers and stares of the court. The walk to the royal wing was a blur. Guards fell into step behind them, their boots echoing in the silent, empty corridors. The opulence of the main citadel gave way to a more Spartan, military aesthetic. This was Kaelin's domain. His quarters were not the luxurious suite Elian might have imagined. They were a series of interconnected rooms, functional and severe. A study filled with data slates and star charts, a training salle with weapon racks along one wall, and a simple, unadorned bedroom with a bed that was little more than a mattress on a low steel frame. It was the room of a soldier, not a prince. Kaelin guided Elian into the small attached med station and gently pushed him to sit on the edge of an examination bed. He worked in silence, his movements precise as he opened a medical kit. He cleaned the wound, his touch firm but careful, and applied a biofoam that hissed as it sealed the gash, a cool, numbing sensation spreading through Elian's arm. The silence stretched between them, thick with everything that had happened. The fear, the pain, the shocking intimacy of their mingled sense. "Why?" Kaelin asked at last, his back to Elian as he put away the supplies. His voice was low, almost rough. "Why did you push me? You could have been killed." Elian looked at the prince's rigid back, at the tension in his shoulders. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "It wasn't a thought. It was an instinct." Kaelin turned around slowly. His face was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. The conditioning of a lifetime warring with the primal truth that had been exposed in the grand hall. "My entire life," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I have been trained to see people as assets or threats, to calculate their value, to sever emotion from duty. I was taught that sentiment is a fatal flaw." He took a step closer, his grey eyes searching Elian's face. "When I saw that chandelier fall, there was no calculation, no thought of the succession or the stability of the empire. My only thought was you." The admission hung in the sterile air of the med station, raw and terrifying in its sincerity. He was confessing a heresy, a betrayal of everything he was supposed to be. Elian felt his own breath catch in his throat. He saw a reflection of his own confinement in the prince's eyes, a man trapped not by walls but by a brutal, unforgiving ideology that had been hammered into him since birth. They were both prisoners of the same system. "Your training was incomplete," Elian said softly. "They forgot to account for this." He didn't know what this was, an alliance, a bond, something fragile and unnamed that had taken root in the sterile soil of the citadel. Kalen reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before his fingers gently traced the line of Elian's jaw. His thumb brushed against Elian's lips, a touch so feather-light it was barely there. It was a gesture of profound, aching tenderness. "Elian," he murmured, saying his name for the first time. It sounded less like a name and more like a prayer or a confession. The sound of it, in Kalen's deep voice, sent a shiver through him. The last of Elian's own walls began to crumble. This man, this prince, this beautiful broken weapon of the empire was just as lost as he was. And in their shared desperation, they were finding something that neither the Chancellor's logic nor the Empire's power could account for. They were finding each other. The move to Kalen's quarters shifted the very foundations of their world. The invisible, charged line between captor and captive blurred, redrawn into something complex and undefined. Elian was no longer a specimen in a jar. He was a presence in the prince's private sanctuary. The Spartan rooms, once a symbol of Kalen's cold discipline, became a shared space, a fragile haven from the ever-watchful eyes of the citadel. In the days following the gala, a strange, quiet domesticity settled over them. Kalen was consumed with the investigation into the accident, spending long hours in his study, reviewing security footage and personnel files. He was hunting, Elian realized, for the Chancellor's hand in the chaos, seeking proof of the sabotage he knew had occurred. During these times, Elian was left to his own devices. He explored the rooms, his bare feet silent on the cold steel floors. He found a small collection of forbidden books, old, leather-bound volumes of poetry from the provinces, hidden away on a bottom shelf. He would sit for hours, tracing the faded, elegant script, the words of his ancestors a balm to his soul. He discovered the star charts. They covered an entire wall of the study, a complex, hand-drawn map of the galaxy, filled with Kalen's precise, angular script, noting stellar classifications and navigational routes. It was a side of the prince he had never imagined, a dreamer, a navigator, a man who looked to the vast, silent emptiness of space with a scientist's curiosity and a poet's longing. It spoke of a desire for something beyond the crushing gravity of his imperial duties. Their interactions were often silent, communicated through small, hesitant gestures. Kalen would emerge from his study, his eyes weary, and find that Elian had left a cup of hot, spiced tea on his desk. Elian would wake in the night from a nightmare. the ghost of the falling chandelier haunting his sleep, and Kalen would be there, a silent, solid presence, sitting in a chair across the room, watching over him until he drifted back to sleep. They spoke, but not of the court, or the chancellor, or their precarious situation. Instead, their conversations were like tentative explorations of a new, undiscovered country. Each other. One evening, Elian was humming one of the old mountain songs, a quiet, melancholic melody, as he looked out the armored viewport in the bedroom. Kalen entered, stopping to listen, his head tilted. "What is that song?" he asked, his voice soft. "It's a lament," Elian replied, not turning from the star-dusted view. "For the miners who were lost in the great collapse 100 years ago. We sing it to remember them, to say their names so they are not forgotten. We are taught that remembrance of the past is a form of dissent," Kalen said, the words sounding like a quote from a textbook. "The empire looks only forward. Then the empire is blind," Elian said simply. "Forgetting the past doesn't erase it. It just leaves you open to repeating its mistakes. Forgetting a name doesn't erase the soul. It just leaves it to wander, alone." Kalen was silent for a long time. He came to stand beside Elian at the viewport. Their shoulders were inches apart, not touching, but Elian could feel the warmth of him, a magnetic pull. "My mother," Kalen said, his voice so low Elian had to strain to hear it. "Her name was Seraphina. She loved the stars. She taught me the constellations." Elian was stunned into silence. The Empress's death was a matter of sterile public record, a transport accident years ago. But Kalen spoke her name like a secret, a treasure he had kept hidden in his heart. "After she died," Kalen continued, his gaze fixed on the distant stars, "my father and the Chancellor decreed that all of her personal effects be destroyed. Her art, her music, her books. They said it was to prevent the weakness of grief from infecting the line of succession. They erased her." He turned to look at Elian, his slate-grey eyes filled with a profound, ancient sorrow. "I was 8 years old. They taught me that love was a liability, that my duty was to be a prince, not a son." In that moment, Elian understood everything. He understood the coldness, the control, the scent of ozone and stone. They were armor. Armor Kalen had been forced to forge around his own heart to survive the systematic erasure of his own capacity for love. Without thinking, Elian reached out and placed his hand on Kalen's arm. The contact was electric. Through the fine fabric of his sleeve, he could feel the rigid muscle, the tension held there for a lifetime. Kalen flinched, a bare flicker of a reaction, as if unused to any touch that wasn't violent or formal, but he didn't pull away. "You have not forgotten her name," Elian said softly. "So she is not gone." A single, perfect tear traced a path down Kalen's cheek. He didn't seem to notice it. He just stared at Elian, his expression one of raw, shattered wonder, as if he were seeing him for the first time. The intimacy of the moment was a fragile, beautiful thing, a flower blooming in the cracks of a concrete fortress. But they were not alone. Their new, dangerous proximity had not gone unnoticed. Lyra arrived one day under the pretext of delivering fresh linens. Her face was paler than usual, her placid mask stretched thin over a frantic, buzzing anxiety. She waited until she was sure they were alone, her eyes darting nervously toward the corridor. "You must be careful," she whispered to Elian, her voice urgent and low. She refused to meet his eyes, her gaze fixed on the floor as she folded a tunic with trembling hands. The Chancellor. He sees everything. The prince's favor is not a shield. It is a target. The brighter he shines it on you, the easier you are to aim at. Lyra, Elian began, his heart aching for her. He is not like them. He is a prince of the Empire, she hissed, her control finally snapping. She looked up, her bleached blue eyes filled with a terrifying, desperate light. They are all the same. They use you. They find you interesting, a puzzle to be solved. And when they solve you or grow bored of you, they discard you. I was interesting once, too. The confession was a ghost, haunting the space between them. He saved you, Lyra whispered, her voice cracking. He chose you over the system. Do you know what that means? It means you are the one thing that can destroy him. The Chancellor knows this. He will not stop until he has removed you. He will use the prince's affection for you as the very weapon to bring him down. She thrust the folded linens into Elian's arms and fled, a phantom of a warning, leaving him alone with the cold weight of her words. She was right. Their bond, this fragile, beautiful thing they were building in the shadows, was not a secret. It was a ticking bomb. And the Chancellor was holding the detonator, waiting for the perfect moment to press the button. Elian looked over at the study, where Kaelin was bent over the data slates, a line of concentration etched between his brows. The prince was fighting for him, for them, in the only way he knew how, with logic, with evidence, with the rules of the system he sought to master. But the Chancellor wasn't playing by the rules. He was rewriting them. And Elian realized, with a chilling certainty, that he could not just be a passive participant in this battle. He could not wait for Kaelin to protect him. He had to become a weapon himself. The Chancellor did not wait long to make his move. He was a master of political theater, and he chose his stage with chilling precision. The attack came not with assassins in the dark or poison in a cup, but with the cold, irrefutable weight of imperial law. Kaelin was summoned to the throne room. Elian was not permitted to attend, left behind in the prince's quarters with 2 stoic imperial guards posted outside his door. The wait was a special kind of torture. The silence of the rooms, once a comfort, now felt like a tomb. He paced the floor, the echo of Lyra's warning, a frantic rhythm in his mind. You are the one thing that can destroy him. Hours crawled by. The light outside the viewport shifted from the cool blue of midday to the deep indigo of evening. Finally, the door opened. It was Kaelin. The sight of him stole the breath from Elian's lungs. The prince's face was ashen, his posture rigid with a barely contained fury. The scent of ozone around him was sharp and volatile, like the air after a series of violent lightning strikes. He looked defeated. "What is it?" Elian asked, his voice a whisper. "What happened?" Kaelin walked to the viewport and stared out at the star field, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "He found no evidence of sabotage," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "The official report concludes the chandelier fell due to a catastrophic structural failure, a 1 in a billion accident." "He's lying," Elian said, stepping closer. "Of course he is," Kaelin bit out, a spark of his usual fire returning. "He buried the evidence, fabricated the reports. He controls the flow of all information in the Citadel. I can't prove a thing." He finally turned to face Elian, and the look in his eyes was one of raw despair. But that wasn't his real move. That was just a distraction, the overture. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He presented evidence to the Emperor, forged communications, encrypted data packets that he intercepted from your home province, transcripts of conversations that never happened. Elian felt a cold dread creeping up his spine. Evidence of what? Of you, Kalen said, his voice breaking. Of you conspiring with rebels from the Grey Peaks. He's framed you as a spy, a traitor, a plant sent here to get close to me, to learn the Citadel's weaknesses, to orchestrate an assassination. The accusation was so ludicrous, so utterly baseless, that Elian might have laughed if the look on Kalen's face wasn't so deadly serious. No one would believe that, Elian protested. The Emperor is my father, Kalen cut in, his voice laced with a bitter, ancient resentment. But he is a figurehead. He has been a pawn of the Chancellor for 20 years. He sees what the Chancellor wants him to see, and what he saw today was a threat to the stability of his empire, a threat to the purity of the royal line. The final, terrible pieces clicked into place in Elian's mind. This was the Chancellor's endgame. He had used Kalen's affection, his protectiveness, as the cornerstone of the fabrication. Kalen's deviation from protocol, his sheltering of Elian, his defiance. It all looked to a paranoid emperor like the actions of a compromised, infatuated fool. What did he order? Elian asked, his own voice steady, though his heart felt like a block of ice in his chest. Kalen wouldn't meet his eyes. He looked down at his own hands as if he couldn't stand the sight of them. To make an example, he whispered. To show the provinces the price of treachery. To show the court the price of my weakness. He finally looked up, and his grey eyes were shattered. He has ordered your public execution. At dawn, 3 days from now. The words fell into the silent room, each one a physical blow. Execution. The word was so final, so absolute. All the hope that had so tentatively begun to bloom in Elian's heart withered and died. Lyra had been right. He was the weapon that would be used to destroy Kalen. If Kalen defied the order, he would be branded a traitor himself, likely sparking a civil war. If he obeyed, he would have to stand by and watch the person he had risked everything to protect be put to death. He would have to kill a part of his own soul. The Chancellor had crafted the perfect, inescapable trap. Elian walked over to Kalen, his movements slow and deliberate. He reached out and took the prince's clenched fist in his hands, gently uncurling the rigid fingers. He held Kalen's hand, his own smaller one, a stark contrast against the prince's. This is not your fault, Elian said, his voice clear and calm, the calm of the condemned. This is what he does. He turns love into a weapon. He turns loyalty into a chain. Kalen let out a harsh, ragged sound. A sob strangled in his throat. I brought you here. I chose you. I made you a target. I did this to you. No, Elian said firmly, forcing Kalen to look at him. You saved me. In the Chancellor's office, you saved my mind. In the Grand Hall, you saved my life. You showed me that a prince of the Empire could be a man. Whatever happens now, you gave me that. The raw emotion in the room was suffocating. Kalen's carefully constructed control was gone, replaced by a desperate, agonizing grief. He pulled Elian into his arms, his embrace fierce and crushing, as if he could physically hold him back from the fate that awaited him. He buried his face in Elian's hair, his body shaking with silent, racking sobs. I will not let him do this, Kalen vowed, his voice a raw, broken whisper against Elian's skin. I will not let you die. What can you do? Elian asked, his own voice muffled against the prince's shoulder. He holds all the power. The law, the emperor, The guards. Then I will break the law, Kalen said, pulling back to look Elian in the eyes. A new light was dawning in his gaze, a terrifying, reckless fire. The fire of a man with nothing left to lose. I will break the Emperor's decree. I will break the whole damn system if I have to. It was madness. It was suicide. An alpha prince against the entire machinery of the Obsidian Empire. He would be crushed. You can't, Elian said, his own fear now for Kalen, not for himself. He will destroy you. Let him try, Kalen snarled, a flash of the predatory alpha returning. But this time, it wasn't cold and controlled. It was hot, wild, and fueled by love and rage. He taught me to be a weapon. He spent my entire life sharpening me, honing me, pointing me at the enemies of the Empire. He just never imagined that one day I would turn around and point myself at him. He framed Elian's face with his hands, his expression one of grim, absolute resolve. He has made a fatal miscalculation. He thinks my affection for you is my greatest weakness. He is about to learn that it is my greatest strength. The choice had been made. The line had been drawn. It was no longer a battle of wills or a game of political chess. It was war, a quiet, desperate war to be fought in the corridors and shadows of the Citadel. Kalen, the perfect prince, the system's chosen son, was about to become its greatest rebel. And Elian, the tribute who was never meant to survive, had become the catalyst for its potential destruction. The next 48 hours were a blur of whispered conversations, strategic planning, and heart-stopping tension. Kalen's quarters became a war room, the star charts on the wall looking down on a very different kind of navigation. The prince, freed from the constraints of a system he now intended to shatter, was a terrifyingly focused force of nature. He moved with a speed and precision that was breathtaking, his mind, once dedicated to upholding imperial doctrine, now working to systematically dismantle it from the inside. He summoned the one person in the Citadel he knew he could trust, the captain of his personal guard, a grizzled, older alpha named Yorick. He was a man who had served Kalen's mother, and his loyalty was to the memory of the woman, not the coldness of the throne. The meeting was tense. Kalen laid out the Chancellor's treachery, the forged evidence, and the death sentence. He did not couch his plan in political necessity. He spoke the plain, unvarnished truth. The Chancellor has used the Emperor's seal to condemn an innocent man to protect his own power. He is twisting the law to serve a private vendetta. I will not allow it. I am going to free him. I am asking you to choose a side, my mother's son, or the man who erased her. Yorick listened, his craggy face impassive. He looked from the prince to Elian, his gaze sharp and assessing. He saw not a provincial spy, but a quiet, steady Omega who looked at his prince with an unwavering loyalty that mirrored his own. The Empress Seraphina believed that justice was the soul of the empire. Jorix said at last, his voice a low rumble. The Chancellor believes order is its soul. I always preferred her definition. He drew his sidearm and placed it on the table. My life and the lives of the 10 guards loyal to me are yours, Your Highness. A small, loyal faction was not enough to win a war, but it was enough to light a fuse. The plan Kalen devised was audacious, relying on speed, surprise, and his intimate knowledge of the Citadel's inner workings. It was not a full-scale coup, but a surgical strike aimed at the heart of the Chancellor's power. The execution was to take place in the Citadel's central courtyard, a sterile, open space designed for military parades and public pronouncements. Elian would be led from the detention level through a series of secure corridors and onto the execution platform. The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1. Jorik and his men would create a diversion, a simulated security breach in the Citadel's power core on the opposite side of the complex. It would draw the bulk of the guard forces away from the central courtyard. Phase 2. Kalen, using his command-level access codes, would override the lockdown protocols on the detention level at the precise moment of the diversion. He and 2 of Yorik's guards would intercept the execution party in a service corridor, neutralizing the guards and freeing Elian. Phase 3. This was the most dangerous part. Instead of escaping, they would proceed directly to the Imperial Broadcast Center, the nerve center from which all official communications were sent. There, Kalen would seize control of the network. He would broadcast the truth to the entire empire. The forged evidence, the Chancellor's manipulations, the corruption at the heart of the throne. He would not be a fugitive prince. He would be a reformer, a revolutionary, exposing the rot and calling for a new order based on his mother's ideals of justice, not the Chancellor's cold calculus of control. It was a gamble of staggering proportions. If they failed at any point, they would be captured and executed as traitors. Elian's role was simple but terrifying. He had to walk the path to his own execution, trusting that Kalen would reach him in time. In the final hours before dawn, a strange calm settled over them. They sat in Kalen's study, the star charts glowing softly in the dim light. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to plan. "Are you afraid?" Kalen asked, his voice quiet in the stillness. "Yes," Elian admitted, "but not of dying. I'm afraid of you failing, of you being—" He couldn't say the word. "I will not fail," Kalen said, his voice filled with a certainty that was absolute. He reached across the space between them and took Elian's hand. His palm was warm and steady. "Elian, when I chose you in the reaping hall, I thought I was selecting a symbol, a tool. I was wrong. I was not choosing. I was being found. You were the one who saw the man inside the prince. You were the one who reminded me of my mother's name. You saved me long before I ever tried to save you." The words were a quiet confession, a final, beautiful truth laid bare between them before the battle. Dawn came, a cold, grey light filtering through the viewport. The guards arrived. They were not Yorik's men, but the Chancellor's, their faces hard and impassive. They placed stasis cuffs on Elian's wrists, the cold metal, a familiar, chilling sensation. They led him from the room. He looked back at Kalen one last time. The prince stood tall, his face a mask of calm resolve, but his eyes were blazing with a silent promise. "I am coming for you." The walk through the corridors was a surreal, silent journey. The Citadel was on high alert, the impending execution casting a pall over the morning routines. Guards stood at every intersection, their presence a constant, oppressive weight. They reached the final checkpoint before the courtyard. Elian could hear the low hum of the crowd gathering outside. His heart hammered against his ribs. The timing had to be perfect. Suddenly, a klaxon began to blare, its piercing shriek echoing through the halls. Red emergency lights bathed the corridor in a hellish glow. "Security breach in the sub-level 3 power core," a voice squawked over the intercom. "All available units respond." The Chancellor's guards exchanged uneasy glances. This was their post, Their orders were to deliver the prisoner, but a threat to the power core was a threat to the entire citadel. Their hesitation was the opening Kalen needed. A service panel on the wall slid open, and Kalen emerged from the darkness of the maintenance tunnel, a plasma rifle in his hands. Yorick's 2 guards were right behind him. The fight was over before it began. Kalen and his men moved with brutal, synchronized efficiency, disabling the Chancellor's guards with non-lethal stun blasts. They crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Kalen was at Elian's side in an instant, a decarbonizer in his hand. He pressed it to the stasis cuffs, and they fell away with a hiss. "Are you all right?" Kalen asked, his eyes scanning Elian for any injury. "I'm all right," Elian breathed, rubbing his wrists. The klaxons were still blaring, the red lights flashing. They had seconds. "To the broadcast center," Kalen commanded, and they began to run. They moved through the service tunnels, a labyrinth Kalen knew by heart. The sounds of the alert faded behind them as they plunged into the citadel's metallic guts. They emerged into a quiet, deserted corridor outside the broadcast center. The heavy blast doors were sealed. "He'll have locked it down," Jorik's man said. "My codes will still work," Kalen said, his fingers flying across a nearby access panel. "He thinks I'm a rogue prince trying to escape. He won't expect me to run toward the heart of his power." The light on the panel flashed green, and the heavy doors began to slide open. They stepped inside. The broadcast center was a vast, circular room, its walls a 360-degree screen, currently showing security feeds from all over the citadel. In the center of the room, on a raised dais, was the master control terminal, and standing beside it, waiting for them, was the Chancellor. He was alone. He was holding a small, elegant pistol, and he was smiling, his thin, chilling smile. "Predictable, Your Highness," the Chancellor said, his calm voice cutting through the tension. "Sentiment always leads to grand, foolish gestures." The blast doors hissed shut behind them, sealing them in. The trap had not been in the corridor. It had been here. The silent hum of the broadcast center's servers was the only sound in the vast, circular room. The Chancellor stood on the central dais, a lone, calm figure against the backdrop of 100 frantic security feeds. The pistol in his hand was not aimed at Kalen, but held loosely at his side, a mere accessory to his absolute control. Kalen and his small team froze, weapons raised, the surprise of the ambush momentarily paralyzing them. "It's over, Your Highness," the Chancellor said, his voice resonating with a placid, unnerving certainty. "Your guards are surrounded. The power core breach was a ghost I created myself, a lure to draw you out. I have been tracking your movements since you first spoke to Captain Jorik. Every step you have taken has been one I have allowed." Kalen's face was a mask of cold fury. He had been outmaneuvered, his own strategy turned against him. "You admit it, then," Kalen said, his voice dangerously low. "You framed him. You fabricated evidence against an innocent man." "Innocence is a sentimental concept," the Chancellor replied, taking a small step forward. "He is not a man. He is a variable, a disruptive element that threatened the stability of the system. He introduced emotion into your calculus, Your Highness, and emotion is chaos. I am merely restoring order." He raised the pistol, but he aimed it not at Kalen or his guards, or even at Elian. He aimed it at the master control terminal beside him. "You came here to tell your story," the Chancellor said, with a slight, condescending smile. "To broadcast your truth to the Empire. A noble, if futile gesture. But I control the narrative. I always have. With a single, deliberate movement, he fired the pistol. The bolt of energy struck the terminal, and it exploded in a shower of sparks. The hundreds of screens on the walls went dark, plunging the room into a dim, emergency-lit twilight. A single, wailing alarm began to sound. "The central broadcast system is fused," the Chancellor announced into the growing chaos. "Your truth will die in this room. With you." Yorick's guards moved to flank him, but Kalen held up a hand, stopping them. He understood. This was not a battle to be won with plasma rifles. It was a battle of ideology, a confrontation between two opposing forces that had been building for years. It was between him and the Chancellor. "You are wrong," Kalen said, taking a step onto the dais. He let his own rifle hang at his side, a gesture of de-escalation, of shifting the terms of the conflict. "You think order is the absence of emotion. You think control is strength. But a system built on lies and fear is a house of cards. It is brittle. It cannot adapt. It can only break. And you believe a system built on a provincial Omega's love is stronger," the Chancellor scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. "It is not his love that is the foundation," Kalen said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority, a power that came not from his title, but from his conviction. "It is his spirit. It is the part of him you could not break, the part of me you could not erase, the part that remembers my mother's name. That is the foundation, justice, empathy, truth. Those are not weaknesses, Chancellor. They are the sources of true, resilient strength." As Kalen spoke, something began to shift in the room. His scent, the familiar ozone and cold stone, began to change. It deepened, enriched by a new, powerful undertone, the scent of conviction, of righteous fury, of a love he was no longer afraid to claim. It was the scent of a true alpha, not one defined by mere dominance, but by the will to protect, to lead, to inspire. The Chancellor faltered for a second, his composure wavering in the face of this unexpected transformation. He had come to face a sentimental boy. He was now facing a king. "Words," the Chancellor spat, regaining his footing. "Empty, idealistic words. The people do not want justice, they want safety, they want order. They will thank me for excising the cancer of your sentiment." "Let's ask them," Kalen said. And with a voice that was no longer just a voice, but a physical force, a resonant wave of pure, focused will, he issued his first true alpha command. "Activate the Citadel's emergency broadcast." It was a command directed not at the destroyed terminal, but at the very systems of the room, at the loyalties hard-coded into every guard and officer in the Citadel. It was a power he had been trained to use for suppression, for control. But now, infused with the full, unshielded force of his emotions, his love for Elian, his grief for his mother, his rage at the Chancellor, it became something else entirely. A key, a catalyst. The emergency alarm cut out. The room fell silent. And then, one by one, the dark screens flickered back to life. But they no longer showed security feeds. They showed Kalen's face, captured by the room's internal sensors. The emergency broadcast system, a redundant network deep within the Citadel's core that the Chancellor had deemed unnecessary to disable, had activated. His command had bypassed the fused terminal, a raw assertion of will over mechanics. He was live, broadcasting not just to the Empire, but to every screen within the Citadel itself. The Chancellor stared, his face a mask of disbelief. His perfect, controlled world was crumbling around him. Kalen turned from the Chancellor and looked directly into the nearest sensor, his gaze connecting with millions across the galaxy. He did not speak of treason or coups. He spoke of his mother, Seraphina. He spoke of her belief in justice. He showed them the forged evidence against Elian, holding up the data slate for all to see. And then he looked at Elian, who had moved to stand beside him on the dais. He took Elian's hand, their fingers lacing together in a simple, profound gesture of unity. "This is Elian of the Grey Peaks," Kalen said, his voice resonating with power and love. "The Chancellor, in his pursuit of absolute order, would have you believe he is a traitor. But his only crime was to remind a lost prince what it means to be human. The tribute system, a tool of fear and division, is hereby abolished. From this day forward, the Empire will not be ruled by fear, but by a covenant of justice. We will not demand submission. We will earn loyalty." He turned his gaze back to the Chancellor, whose face had gone pale, his composure finally irrevocably shattered. The pistol hung uselessly in his hand. He had lost. His weapon was information, and his opponent had just seized control of the entire arsenal. "You are relieved of your duties, Chancellor," Kalen said, his voice calm and absolute. "You will be held accountable for your crimes." Yorick and his guards, their faces filled with a new, fervent loyalty, moved forward and took the pistol from the Chancellor's unresisting hand. The architect of the Empire, the man who saw people as variables, was finally undone by the one equation he could never solve: the human heart. Elian stood beside Kalen, their hands clasped together, a silent testament to the prince's words. He was no longer a tribute, a symbol of subjugation. He was a partner, a catalyst, a quiet Omega from a forgotten province who had brought an empire to its knees, not with violence or rebellion, but with the simple, unyielding power of his own unbroken spirit. On the screens all around them, Kalen's face was replaced by images from across the citadel, guards lowering their weapons, technicians in the control rooms staring in stunned silence, their faces filled not with fear, but with a dawning, incredulous hope. The system wasn't broken. It was being reborn. The days that followed the broadcast were a quiet storm. The Empire did not collapse into chaos, as the Chancellor had predicted. Instead, a wave of profound, uncertain change rippled out from the citadel. The Emperor, confronted with the irrefutable evidence of the Chancellor's treason and the undeniable power of his son's broadcast, abdicated the throne. He retreated into a self-imposed exile, a ghost haunted by the memory of the wife he had allowed, owed to be erased, and the son he had nearly allowed to be broken. Kalen, by right of succession and by the overwhelming support of the military and the populace, was named Prince Regent, the acting head of an empire in transition. The Chancellor was imprisoned, his trial pending, his cold, logical world reduced to the dimensions of a single, silent cell. But these were grand, sweeping events, the stuff of historical records. The true change, the one that mattered most, was quiet and personal. It took place in the Citadel's glass arboretum, a place Kalen had ordered unsealed for the first time in 20 years. It had been his mother's sanctuary, a vast, domed structure filled with plants and flowers from every corner of the galaxy, left to grow wild and untended after her death. Now, sunlight streamed through the clean panes of glass, illuminating a riot of untamed, organic life. The air was warm and humid, thick with the scent of damp earth, blooming nightshade, and 1,000 other living things. It was a stark, beautiful contrast to the sterile, ozone-scented corridors of the citadel. Kaelin and Elian walked the overgrown paths, their footsteps soft on the moss-covered stones. The weight of their new roles was immense, the future of the Empire a vast, unwritten page. But here, in this pocket of living, breathing wilderness, they were just two people, scarred and weary, but finally, truly free. Kaelin had shed his severe, black uniform. He wore a simple, soft grey tunic, almost identical to the one Elian had been forced to wear. The change was symbolic, a quiet dismantling of the hierarchy that had defined their lives. He was no longer just a prince. Elian was no longer just a tribute. They were equals. They stopped before a sprawling vine covered in delicate bell-shaped flowers that glowed with a soft, internal luminescence. Kaelin reached out and gently touched a petal, his expression thoughtful. "My mother used to say this was the heart of the citadel," he murmured. "A reminder that even in a place of stone and steel, life finds a way. That order and wildness can coexist." He turned to Elian, his slate-grey eyes, once so stormy and cold, now clear and calm. "I have so much to unlearn, so much to rebuild. Not just the Empire, myself." "You won't have to do it alone," Elian said softly. He reached out and took Kaelin's hand, their fingers intertwined, a natural, easy gesture that spoke of a deep and settled intimacy. Their bond, once a dangerous secret, was now the acknowledged foundation of this new era. It was not the possessive, primal bond of an alpha claiming an omega. It was a partnership, a conscious daily choice to stand together, a choice made in freedom. Lyra had come to see him the day before. Her eyes, for the first time, were no longer vacant. They were filled with a terrifying, beautiful, painful clarity. The spell of the Chancellor's conditioning had been broken, and she was left to grapple with the ghost of the girl she had been forced to kill. "Thank you," she had whispered, her hands trembling. "You woke me up." She had requested a transfer back to her home province, to the sea she had almost forgotten. She wanted to learn her own name again. Her story was a reminder of the cost of the old ways and a testament to the hope of the new. Kaelin gently squeezed Elian's hand, pulling him from his thoughts. "The provincial delegations will begin arriving next week," he said, a note of weariness in his voice. "We have to draft new treaties, establish new relationships based on mutual respect, not subjugation. It will be difficult." "We'll do it together," Elian affirmed, his voice steady. He looked up at Kaelin, at the man he had seen at his most broken and his most powerful. He saw the boy who missed his mother, the soldier who bore the weight of a dynasty, and the alpha who had chosen love over power. His scent, a permanent, comforting blend of ozone and stone, was now layered with something warmer, something that smelled like home. Elian allowed his own scent to bloom softly in the warm air, the clean, sharp fragrance of winter hyacinth and ash. It was no longer a secret weapon or a defiant whisper. It was just him, a scent of mountains and snow, of resilience and sorrow, of a spirit that had endured the harshest winter and was now, finally, ready for the spring. They stood in silence for a long time, watching as the twin suns began to set, painting the glass dome of the arboretum in hues of gold and rose. The dawn of their rebellion had been violent and uncertain, but this new dusk was filled with a quiet, profound peace. "Elian," Kaelin said, his voice soft. He turned fully to face him, his hands coming up to gently cup Elian's face. I haven't said it," he faltered, the words still new and strange on his tongue. The training, it runs deep. You don't have to say it, Elian whispered, leaning into his touch. I know. But Kalen shook his head, a small, determined gesture. I want to. He took a breath, his gaze unwavering. I love you. Not as a prince loves a consort or an alpha loves an omega. I love you. The man, the spirit, the heart that taught mine how to beat again. A tear slipped down Elian's cheek, a tear not of sorrow, but of overwhelming, unbelievable joy. He leaned in and pressed his lips to Kalen's, a soft, tentative kiss that was both a beginning and an end. It was the end of their confinement, the end of their fear, and it was the beginning of everything else. As they stood there, wrapped in the quiet embrace of the living, breathing heart of the citadel, they were no longer a prince and a tribute. They were two souls who had found each other in the dark and had, against all odds, fought their way into the light. The future was uncertain, the work ahead immense, but they would face it together, their hands clasped, their scents mingled, their hearts finally and completely free.